Hello, how are you doing? Not all that much is published towards the end of the year, but there have been some really interesting sounding new books that have been published in November here in the UK. And so I've purchased some of these, and other ones publishers have kindly sent me. So I thought I'd go through this stack of new books I have and talk about why I'm so eager to get to them. I'd love to know if you're interested in reading any of these, or if you have read any of them, what you think of them. Please let me know in the comments below. So first off, I want to talk about this new novel called New Year, and it's by Juli Zeh, and it's translated from the German by Alta L. Price. And I especially interested in reading this novel because it's set in Lanzarote, where I went a few months ago for a week's break. And this is indeed about a family that goes on holiday to Lanzarote, and it is over the course of New Year's. And the father of the family, he's cycling to a certain area of the island, and while he's on this long, arduous cycle ride, he starts to think back over on his life and things about his past, and then through a coincidence he suddenly realizes something about his past which changes how he thinks about everything. And so it sounds like this kind of moment of revelation, and because of the setting, I'm really keen to read about the environment of this beautiful island that I visited. Somebody Loves You by Mona Arshi, and this is about a girl named Ruby who one day decides to stop talking, and so goes completely silent, partly because of issues and problems that are going on around her in her life, and her mother is suffering from mental health problems, and this is her way of dealing with it. And so it's not just about the stories we tell ourselves, but the stories we refuse to tell ourselves. And so, not just the physical silence of her, but what she's refusing to think about. And I think that sounds like a really interesting new perspective, and this has a beautiful cover. I also have some books of nonfiction, which I think sound really good, and of course it's Nonfiction November, and I'm trying to read more nonfiction this month. The first is a book which was actually published earlier this year, I think around May, but I only just got a copy of it now. It's called The Breakup Monologues by Rosie, Wilby, and this is her story and her account of breakups in the modern era, because at one point she was broken up with over email. And so it's about how heartbreak is really a universal thing that we all experience in our lives, but particularly in the modern age, there are different ways that breakups occur and different reactions to it. And actually, the artist Sophie Calley, she did a whole fantastic exhibit all about how she was broken up with, and how she interviewed a number of people about this issue. And you can actually see behind me, there's a portrait of Sophie Calley there. So yeah. But yeah, and so Rosie Wilby, she also interviews a number of sociologists and experts to discuss this issue, but yeah, also is reflecting upon her own experience and talking about the issue in general. So yeah, I think that sounds like a really interesting subject. Then there is a book called Why Karen Carpenter Matters, and I'm a really big fan of the Carpenters and really drawn to them, but also yeah, the story of Karen Carpenter's life is such a tragic story. If you don't know, she was a musician of the 1960s and 70s that became hugely popular, but also suffered from an eating disorder, which eventually led to her death. And so the author explores Karen Carpenter's life, so it's sort of partly a biography about her and her impact upon our culture, but also reflecting on the author Karen Tongson's own life and her experiences growing up in the Philippines and moving to America, and yeah, how Karen Carpenter's experience has then been sort of refracted through her own, and why we connect so strongly to Karen Carpenter as a person, as a kind of outsider in our culture. Then for something really different, there's the nonfiction book called The Dublin Railway Murder by Thomas Morris. And this is an account of a horrific murder. There's been a murder. Sorry, in Ireland in the mid 1800s, and a man that was really brutally killed, who worked in a railway station, and but the circumstances surrounding his death were very mysterious, and there were a number of investigations looking into it because there was a lot of money around him, none of which was stolen. There didn't seem to be any apparent motive for the murder, and there was a number of investigations, and no solution was ever found. And so the author looks back on this case and finds there's a much deeper story to this than what first is on the surface. And so it's a nonfiction book, but it's meant to read as kind of like a murder mystery because of following the clues of this case. Then there is a new book of short stories by the great author Neil Bartlett called Address Book. Neil Bartlett's writing is so excellent. I think he deserves to be better known as a writer, because his writing is so powerful and his prose are really beautiful. He often writes about queer experience, and I've read multiple of his novels like The Disappearance Boy and Skin Lane, and he's just so excellent. And so these are 7 short stories about 7 different characters in 7 different time periods and locations, but they sort of span a lot of different subjects, but some of them are very contemporary. One is written about a character's experience during the current pandemic. Another story goes back to the 1960s and involves a woman who gradually comes to accept a queer neighbor of hers. And I'm really looking forward to diving into these over the winter period. There's a reprint of a classic novel called Palace of the Peacock by Wilson Harris, who was an author of Guyana. This is a novel that was first published in 1960, and it involves the story of a group of men that are traveling up a river, led by a very domineering man who is chasing after a certain woman, but he's also seeking to exploit the indigenous people they meet along this river in Guyana for their labor and for their own personal gain. And I hadn't heard of this novel before, but it sounds really excellent, and the author Monique Roffey is a fan. She calls this a masterpiece. I love this book for its language, adventure, and wisdoms, how it reverences and unearths another time. Then I have a novel with a gorgeous cover called Chouette by Claire Oshetsky, and this is the story of a woman named Tiny who discovers that she's pregnant, and her husband is delighted at this news, but she says that the baby is not his, that this is going to be an owl baby. And her child, people around her after she gives birth to this child are concerned because the child has very different behavior from the norm. She never learns to speak. She sort of lashes out in anger at people, but Tiny thinks that her child is fine just the way she is. And so this is exploring children that have non-conforming behavior, which is something that's been, I think, been being talked about more and like explored in more fiction, like I talked about with Richard Powers and his novel Bewilderment. And so I'm really looking forward to reading more about this. Another new novel with a gorgeous cover is Learwife by J.R. Thorp, and also it happens to have a bird on the cover of it, like Chouette. But this novel looks at the life of King Lear. So in Shakespeare's play King Lear, King Lear is giving up his kingdom to his daughters, and he steadily goes insane. But this is looking at the story of King Lear's wife and what happened to her. Which I can't remember in the play if she's ever even like mentioned. This author in this debut novel is fictionally exploring that question of the wife who in her story she's sent away to a nunnery and lives there, and so it's about why she was expelled there and looking at her own perspective. And I love novels and stories that set off their like starting point of their own stories of a seemingly minor character from a more well-known work, and I just think that's a really interesting fictional exercise to do. And I've heard really great things about this. I picked this book up and got a copy of it because Bob the Booker recommended it so highly in one of his videos, and so I'm really looking forward to reading it. And speaking of Bob, another novel he really recommended that I'm looking forward to reading is Seesaw by Timothy Ogene. This is about a Nigerian writer. It's a novel about a Nigerian writer who's invited to join a writing program in Boston in America, and this is seen as a great honor. And but when he goes there, he finds there's expectations about what he is expected to do and how he's expected to represent his culture, which he isn't really on board with, and so he kind of rebels against, and he's kicked out of the program and then goes on a road journey across America to try to connect with a man who's a friend of his father's. And it's exploring that perspective, and it just sounds like such a good story. Another novel which is a kind of journey across America story is The Selfless Act of Breathing by J.J. Bola. And this is about a British Congolese man who discovers some tragic news, and he's 30 years old. Things seem to be going well in his life, but he's really struggling with the culture around him, and so he decides to just get up, go to America, and go on a journey until he runs out of money, and then he wants to kill himself. And so it's quite drastic measures, and it's following that personal journey and what happens to him. And it reminds me of this film called The Living End, where these men, they discover a medical diagnosis and then they go on a journey till the end. They just want to keep like traveling until they completely run out of money and run out of steam, and then just want to end things. And so it's exploring that kind of desperate situation and crisis in an individual's life. Pieces by Helen Oyeymi. This is it's difficult to summarize this novel, as it is probably difficult to summarize a lot of Helen Oyeyemi's writing. I think her writing is really fascinating and intriguing, and she's writing like no one else I can think of today. I think she's such an original writer, but I have to say I'm never fully fallen in love with her writing. It's because it's quite difficult to follow some of the storylines sometimes, and it's kind of this almost like Baroque style of storytelling, which is difficult to become accustomed to, but which is really fascinating. And so I feel really conflicted about her books, but I've heard really good things about this. And my friend Anna James has recommended it, and so the story, I guess, is about a train journey and two people on this train, but we don't know where this train is going or why these people are on it. And with each station they stop at, the mystery seems to deepen, and strange things are happening, and mysterious people are on board this train, and you're following this story, and just sort of picking up the pieces of where it's going and what it all really means. And so I'm sort of looking forward to exploring this, but slightly trepidatious about reading her writing. But Yeah, I don't know if you've read Helen Oyeymi. Like, let me know what you think about her writing in the comments below. Harsh Times by Mario Vargas Llosa, and this is a novel set in Guatemala in the 1950s when the CIA became involved, sort of infiltrated the politics of the country and toppled the government because they believed that they had a sort of communist agenda that they were trying to implant in America, which was later discovered to be false. But yeah, it's about the individuals that were involved in this and the ideals behind it and the whole sort of Cold War politics of the time. And so I'm guessing that this title is a play on Dickens' novel Hard Times, the title of that. Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating story. Skylark by Alice O'Keefe. This is a novel which looks at different shady politics of the time. So this is looking at the phenomenon of spy cops in Britain in the 1990s, which was a big, huge scandal that was sort of first uncovered like about a decade ago, and it's really shocking. So this is set in the 90s and is about a young woman that is an environmental activist, and she becomes involved with, romantically involved with a man who has a secret past. And what that is he was employed by the police to sort of spy upon the activists of the time, and yeah, and it was later uncovered that there were a number of paid policemen like this that got really that sort of infiltrated different organizations, and the personal lives of individuals, got romantically involved and sometimes married and had families with people, but all the time had this secret of their past, that they were a kind of undercover agent undergoing these things, which was incredibly shocking to learn about. And so she dramatizes that story and the issues of the people involved. The Watch by Bibi Berki. This is a novel set in the late 1980s on a very hot summer night when two women that come from very different backgrounds come together to discuss their lives and how they want to progress forward in their lives. And they make some big decisions and conclusions about what they want to do. And it's exploring the issues to do with power dynamics and privilege. And so it sounds like an intimate and contemplative story. And finally, for something a bit different, because we're going into the winter period and just feels like crime stories feel appropriate for this time of year. And so I have a new crime novel called The Missing Hours by Juli Dahl. And this is a story about a young woman in New York City who comes from a very privileged background. She has a trust fund and she has thousands of Instagram followers, and so she seems to have it all. But then on one drunken night, something very traumatic happens, and the next day she can't remember what exactly happened, but then her behavior completely changes and she sort of drops out of college and drops out on her life and doesn't speak to her family. And so it's about the mystery of what happened to her, but also exploring this bigger culture of power and privilege and the meaning of that. So those are all of the books I had. Like I said, let me know if you're interested in reading any of these, or if you have read any of them. Let me know your thoughts about them, and if you would encourage me to read any sooner than later, yeah, please let me know about that. But if you have any good new books that you bought just recently, I'd love to know about those as well. So thank you for watching. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.